Mommy's on the first floor, Dad and I are on the second. Betty with her husband and kids are in the guest house. My mother-in-law was assigning rooms in my new cottage. They didn't like what I yelled at them through the gate. Gwen woke up to a sunbeam persistently hitting her eyes. She stretched, smiled, and only then realized she was alone in bed. Dave was already gone. A strange start to their married life. The wedding was just yesterday, and today her husband had already rushed off to work. Something urgent in his accounting job that couldn't wait, not even for the day after his own wedding. My boss is a tyrant, honey, he explained while pulling on his trousers at 6 a.m. The project's on fire. I'll be quick, back by lunch. And then I'm all yours. Gwen didn't argue. After all, they had already lived together in her cottage for a year, and making it official didn't change much in their daily lives. Except now she was officially Dave's wife, not just his girlfriend. She sat up in bed, fluffed the pillow, and reached for her phone. Time to book the honeymoon. They had decided to postpone it for a week. It worked better with their schedules. Maybe Turkey or Greece? No, Bali would be better. Far, but it's worth splurging at least once in life, Gwen thought while browsing a travel agency's website. They had money for the trip. Gwen earned well at her advertising agency. And in fact, this two-story cottage on the outskirts of town was her achievement and her property. She bought it 2 years ago, before she even met Dave, after receiving a bonus for a major project and adding it to her savings. Her parents had helped with the down payment, and the rest was a mortgage she was steadily paying off. The house was her pride, spacious, full of light, with a large kitchen living room, 3 bedrooms, and a cozy terrace. Behind the house was a garden with apple and cherry trees, which Gwen had planted the very first year. Dave moved in 3 months after they met. He'd insisted on paying half the mortgage, but Gwen had refused. This is my house, my responsibility. Just help out with the chores. And he did, fixing, building, digging. Life with him, domestically speaking, was easy. Gwen went downstairs to the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and opened the window. The May morning filled the room with the scent of lilacs and freshness. A day like this made you want to sing. Last night, despite being tired from the wedding, she and Dave sat on the terrace until 2 a.m., drinking champagne and making plans. Gwen dreamed of having children. In a year, once the mortgage was paid off and she could take a breather. Dave nodded, kissed her neck, and said he wanted twins. Her phone vibrated, interrupting her thoughts. The screen read, Louise. Her mother-in-law. Third call this morning. Gwen sighed and tapped answer. Gwen, sunshine. Louise's voice was overly cheerful. How's the first morning of being a married lady? Thanks, Louise, everything's great. Dave ran off already, huh? My hard worker. Where did he get to be so responsible? Must be from his father, Gwen thought, but said aloud, yes, he had something urgent at work. Well, I'm calling because your father-in-law and I thought you need help getting everything set up. Now that you're a family, things should be organized properly. I've got lots of helpful advice, and I can pitch in around the house too. Thanks, but we're managing, Gwen replied cautiously. Everything's already set up, we haven't just moved in. Oh, don't be silly, dear. It's one thing just to live, another to build a real family home. That takes a woman's wisdom. You'll see, with my advice, the house will be transformed. Gwen closed her eyes. Since their first meeting, her mother-in-law had tried to help arrange her home, moving furniture, changing curtains, giving endless cleaning and cooking tips. So far, Gwen had held her off successfully. But since the wedding, Louise's pushiness had clearly intensified. We're planning the honeymoon, Gwen changed the subject. We're flying out next weekend, most likely. Oh? And where exactly are you two off to? Her mother-in-law asked, alarm in her voice. Will Dave even be allowed time off work? You know these are uncertain times. Jobs are no joke. They'll let him go, we've already arranged it, Gwen snapped. Sorry, Louise, my coffee's boiling over. Goodbye. She hung up and exhaled. The coffee wasn't boiling over, of course, but any conversation with her mother-in-law was draining. After each one, Gwen felt like a squeezed lemon. She poured coffee into a large mug, grabbed her laptop, and opened the travel agency site. Time to pick a destination. Bali. Definitely Bali. 2 weeks on a paradise island, far from work, household stress, and her mother-in-law. Suddenly, the sound of an engine rumbled outside. Gwen glanced away from the laptop and looked out the window. A truck was crawling down the street, followed by 2 cars. The caravan stopped right in front of her gate. Gwen frowned. Strange. She hadn't ordered any deliveries. Maybe it was for the neighbors? A woman in a bright red dress jumped out of the first car and confidently walked toward the gate. Gwen squinted and felt a chill spread through her chest. Louise. Behind her, others began emerging from the vehicles. Her father-in-law, a hunched old woman with a cane, Louise's mother, whom Gwen had only seen once, at the wedding. 2 burly men in work clothes jumped out of the van, clearly movers. And from the second car spilled a whole crowd, Betty, Dave's sister, with her 3 screaming children and her husband, carrying boxes. What the hell, was all Gwen managed to think before the doorbell rang. Gwen. Louise clapped her hands in delight. We came to celebrate your new home. And your official marriage. Gwen silently stared at the car caravan. The movers were already unloading furniture, a wardrobe, a dresser, some chairs. Louise, Gwen said slowly, anxiety rising in her chest. What's going on? We're moving in, her mother-in-law announced cheerfully. For good. We're one family now, so we'll live together. Your house is big, there's plenty of room for everyone. She opened the gate and stepped into the yard. The rest followed, her father-in-law supporting the elderly mother, Betty with her kids and husband. I've got it all figured out, Louise chattered as she neared the porch. Mommy will take the downstairs room, her legs are bad, can't do stairs. Your father-in-law and I will set up upstairs. And Betty's crew can settle in your guest house. Fresh air is good for the children. Gwen stood frozen in shock. Her ears were ringing like she was inside a seashell. Her thoughts tangled. This is insane, she thought. They can't just move into my house like this. But the movers were already dragging furniture across her lawn. Betty's kids were screeching as they trampled her perfectly trimmed grass, and Louise kept talking about family values, respecting elders, and blood ties. It felt like Gwen was watching from outside her own body. There was her mother-in-law marching down her walkway. There were movers heaving in some ancient sideboard. There were Betty's kids stomping through her tulip bed she'd just planted. And there was the old woman, Dave's great-grandmother, hobbling toward the porch, mumbling something about, finally, a decent place to live out my days. Meanwhile, Louise kept prattling, waving her hands like a conductor in front of an orchestra. Don't worry, Gwen, we'll teach you everything. Real cooking, proper housework. You've spoiled him, you know. He told me your soup comes out a bit watery. In our family, soup's meant to be thick enough for a spoon to stand up in. She laughed at her own joke and turned to the movers. Okay, boys, start with Mom's bed. It's orthopedic, special. Put it in the room left of the entrance. That was the last straw. Gwen, frozen until that moment, suddenly stepped forward and held up a hand to stop the movers. Hold it! Her voice came out unexpectedly low and firm. The whole procession froze. Even Betty's kids quieted, sensing a shift in the air. Gwen stared directly into Louise's eyes. Louise, who told you that you could move into my house? What do you mean, your house? Louise asked, genuinely confused. Dave's your husband now, which means the house is yours together. And we're his family. It all makes sense. No, Gwen snapped. What would make sense is if you had asked the homeowner's permission first. Which is me. Louise smiled indulgently, like you would at a stubborn child. Gwen, don't be selfish. In a family, you share. Look, we're just in a tough spot. She lowered her voice like she was revealing a dark family secret. Mom's apartment was sold 2 years ago, after we brought her to live with us. We gave the money to Christopher, she nodded at Betty's sullen husband, for his business. He started a transport company, but it didn't work out. Went under. Now works hard to find, and renting an apartment is expensive. We could move into our 1-bedroom, Louise continued, but 5 people in 1 room? That's crazy. So we thought, we'll solve everything at once. You've got all this space going unused. Why let it go to waste? Gwen listened, and what rose inside her wasn't just anger, it was rage. She remembered how she'd saved for the down payment for a year. Took on extra jobs. Denied herself everything so she could buy this house. Her house. All right then, Gwen took a deep breath. You have exactly 5 minutes. Everything you've already unloaded, load it back up and leave. All of it. Right now. Her mother-in-law stared at her wide-eyed, as if she couldn't believe her ears. What are you saying? We're family. You're throwing us out onto the street? You have your own apartment, Gwen countered. I'm not throwing anyone out onto the street. I'm simply not letting you barge into my home without asking or getting permission. Louise's face turned red. A vein bulged on her forehead. Not let us? Who do you think you are to not let us? Some girl who wrapped my son around her finger. We're his parents. We have every right to live near our son. Gwen felt the anger she'd been holding back break through. She stepped toward the gate and did something she never expected from herself. She unleashed a torrent of the most choice curses she'd ever uttered. Years of working in a male-dominated ad agency had clearly left their mark. The movers whistled, one even nodded in respect. Her father-in-law looked away, embarrassed, and Betty's kids stared open-mouthed, clearly expanding their vocabulary. Gwen wasn't just cursing. She was unloading everything she had bottled up over months of dealing with this family, the constant advice and criticism, the meddling, the manipulation, the hypocrisy. And she finished with a clear demand, leave and don't come back without an invitation. When she stopped, a heavy silence fell. Louise stood pale, gripping the gate like her life depended on it. You. The mother-in-law was gasping in outrage. How dare you talk to your elders like that? To your husband's mother? Then something unexpected happened. With surprising strength for her build, she yanked the gate toward her. The hinges groaned pitifully. This is my son's house, she screamed, continuing to pull on the gate. And I have every right to live here. Dave, honey. She screamed as if Dave could hear her from 10 kilometers away at work. Your wife is throwing your mother out. Your own mother. One of the movers shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. Ma'am, could you calm down? Where should we put the furniture, after all? Bring it into the house, Louise commanded. Quickly, before this thing changes her mind. Gwen stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Just try it. The movers exchanged glances. The situation was becoming increasingly absurd. Meanwhile, Betty had herded the kids back into the car and was whispering with her husband, who looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Suddenly, a voice came from the neighboring house. Hey, what's going on here? What's all the noise so early in the morning? It was their neighbor Tiffany, retired, and the terror of the entire neighborhood. Nothing escaped her attention. Good morning, Tiffany, Gwen greeted politely. We're having a bit of a family misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? Louise snapped. A mother can't visit her son now? What kind of nonsense is that? Tiffany looked over the whole group, the truck, the furniture, and nodded knowingly. Ah, I see. Mother-in-law's come for a visit, she said, turning to Louise. Brought a lot of stuff? We're moving in for good, the mother-in-law declared proudly. The neighbor looked at Gwen. And you? You okay with that? No, Gwen replied firmly. This is my house. I didn't give permission. Tiffany nodded knowingly and pulled out her phone. Then I'm calling Oliver, he'll sort it out. Who? Louise asked, confused. Our local police officer, the neighbor explained as she dialed. Oliver, we've got a situation here. Looks like an illegal trespass. Yeah, I'll wait. Louise finally let go of the gate and turned to the movers. Quick, bring the stuff inside before the police get here. Gwen just shook her head. Seriously? You want to make this worse now? This is just a family conflict, for now. But it could easily become a criminal case of unlawful entry. The movers hesitantly grabbed the china cabinet, but then one of them shook his head. Nah, man, I didn't sign up for criminal charges. We were just hired to move furniture. They didn't have to wait long for the officer. 15 minutes later, a beat-up truck pulled up at the gate, and a solid, middle-aged man in uniform stepped out. All right, what's going on here? He asked, surveying the gathered crowd. Louise rushed toward him like he was her savior. Officer, help us. Our daughter-in-law is throwing us out of our son's home. We came to visit our boy, and she won't let us in. It's against every law, human and divine. The local officer, known to everyone simply as Oliver, listened calmly to the tirade, then turned to Gwen. Good afternoon. Are you the homeowner? Yes, Gwen nodded. The house is fully owned by me. I bought it before I got married. May I see the documents? Gwen nodded and went inside. She returned a minute later with the ownership certificate. Oliver examined the papers carefully, verified the address, and looked back at Louise. All right, ma'am, here's the situation. According to these documents, the legal owner of the house is Gwen Brown. The fact that she got married does not make her property communal. Anything purchased before the marriage remains the personal property of the spouse. But she's married to my son, Louise protested. That's legally irrelevant, the officer explained patiently. Entering someone's home against their will is considered unlawful trespass and is a criminal offense. If the homeowner does not consent to your living here, you have no right to stay. Louise wouldn't give up. But Dave lives here, that means we can too. No, Oliver shook his head. Your son lives here with the owner's permission. He doesn't have the authority to invite anyone else for permanent residence without her consent. Gwen silently watched as the defiance slowly drained from her mother-in-law's face, replaced by confusion and anger. But this isn't right. Louise made one last attempt. We're family. Family matters are for you to resolve among yourselves, Oliver said firmly. But in terms of the law, the situation is clear. If you don't leave within. He checked his watch. Half an hour, I'll have to file a report for unlawful entry. The movers didn't wait for things to escalate. They were already loading the furniture back into the truck. Gwen's father-in-law whispered something to Louise, trying to steer her toward the car. Betty approached Gwen, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. Gwen, I'm sorry it turned out like this. Mom didn't tell us she hadn't cleared it with you. We thought everything was arranged. Gwen gave her sister-in-law a tired look. Seriously? You really thought I'd just let all of you move into my house without a word? Betty looked down. Well, Mom said you'd be happy. That you must be lonely in such a big house. Gwen just waved her off. Tell your mother that next time she wants to plan something involving my home, she should ask for my permission first. Half an hour later, the caravan of cars pulled away from her gate. Louise shot Gwen a withering glare and promised that Dave would hear about all of this. The grandmother in the back seat was sobbing. Betty's kids were still crying, and the father-in-law stood silently smoking by the car. When the last car disappeared around the corner, Gwen went back inside, poured herself a glass of wine, never mind that it wasn't even noon, and collapsed onto the couch. She was shaking from the stress. Tiffany, who had been watching everything unfold, peeked over the fence. You okay? All right, Gwen toasted with her glass. I'll be there when I finish this. You did the right thing not to let them in, the neighbor approved. A mother-in-law in the house is worse than a fire. My sister-in-law got caught the same way. She let her mother-in-law in for a month while she was fixing her apartment. She's been living there for 3 years now. They can't survive. Gwen smiled wryly. Thanks for calling Oliver. Don't mention it, the neighbor waved it off. I've been through it myself. I know how it is. Left alone, Gwen thought about what Dave would say when he found out what had happened. Of course, Louisa was already calling him, telling him what a heartless wife he had, kicking out the poor old mother. Gwen finished her wine, put down the glass, and decisively picked up her phone. She needed to tell Dave herself what happened before his mother spun him some lies. But Dave didn't answer. He was probably really busy at work. Gwen sent him a message. We need to have a serious talk when you get back. Your family tried to move into our house today without asking. I kicked them all out. Details when we meet. She leaned back against the sofa and closed her eyes. Something told her that their calm honeymoon in Bali was now seriously in question, and possibly all their future family happiness as well. Gwen spent the whole day on edge. Twice she almost called Dave, but each time she put the phone down. He had to come himself and hear her version of events. Toward evening, she heard the sound of a car pulling up and looked out the window. Yes, it was him. After parking, Dave didn't hurry to get out. He sat holding the steering wheel, staring blankly ahead. From his posture, Gwen immediately knew his mother had already worked on him. Finally, the door slammed, footsteps on the porch, the key turning in the lock. Gwen met her husband in the hallway, arms crossed over her chest. Hi, she tried to keep her voice steady. Dave looked down, avoiding her gaze. Hi, he took off his jacket and hung it neatly on the coat rack with exaggerated care. How was your day? Don't pretend, Gwen shook her head. I know your mother has already called. What did she say to you? Dave finally raised his eyes. Tired and red-rimmed. She was crying, he said quietly. Said you insulted her in front of all the neighbors, kicked the old folks out onto the street, cursed at her. Is that true? Gwen felt anger rising inside her. Let's take it from the beginning. She took his hand and led him to the kitchen. Sit down. I'll tell you everything, then you decide who's right and who's not. Dave obediently sat in the chair. Gwen set a cup of tea in front of him and sat opposite. This morning, she began in an even voice, while you were at work, your mother brought a whole caravan to our house, 2 cars, a truck with furniture, movers. With her were your father, grandmother, Betty with her husband and kids. They were planning to move in? No. They already started moving in. Without warning. Without my permission. Louisa declared that they were all going to live here now. She paused, watching her husband's reaction. Dave stared into his cup, twisting it in his hands. She assigned rooms, Gwen continued. Grandma got the first floor, your parents the second, Betty and her family the guest house. And she assigned me the role of housekeeper, cooking, cleaning, serving everyone, without even asking if I agreed. Dave frowned but said nothing. She tried to break down the gate when I refused to let them in, Gwen's voice trembled. Yes, I lost it. Yes, I cursed. But only after your mother tried to force her way into my house. The neighbor called the police officer. He explained that legally they have no right to live here without my consent. Dave raised his head. Why didn't you just call me and discuss it? Why make a scene in front of the neighbors? Seriously? Gwen couldn't believe her ears. Your mother dragged a whole house of furniture and relatives to us without permission, and I'm the one to blame. I was supposed to call and discuss it. They're my family, Dave said quietly. My mother, father, grandmother. You can't just throw them out onto the street. I didn't throw anyone out onto the street, Gwen's voice rang out. They have their own apartment. Your mother just wanted to move into a 300-square-meter cottage instead of a Khrushchevka. Dave stood up, nervously ran his hand through his hair. You don't understand, their situation is complicated. Betty can barely make ends meet with the kids. Her husband is out of work. And that's my problem? Gwen interrupted. I'm supposed to sacrifice my home, my comfort, my personal space because your sister's husband went bankrupt? Or maybe I should tell you where the money for that business came from. Dave tensed. How do you know? Your mother bragged, Gwen smirked. They sold your grandmother's apartment, took the old lady in, and gave the money to Betty's husband. He blew it all. And now, instead of taking responsibility for their decisions, they want to dump the problem on us. Dave sank heavily back into the chair. You don't understand how families work. We've always supported each other. Supporting is one thing, Gwen objected. Being a burden is another. For starters, you could have at least asked me instead of hauling in furniture and movers. Dave was silent, staring at his hands. Did you know? Gwen suddenly asked. Did you know your mother planned to move the whole family into our house? She saw his face answer before he spoke. She mentioned something, hinting that it was cramped for them. But I didn't think she would come straight away with all their stuff. Gwen felt a chill inside. And you didn't explain to her that she needed to ask me first? That this is my house? That we just got married and might want to live like a normal young couple, not a commune? Dave was silent. That silence said enough. I see, Gwen stood up. You know what angers me the most? Not that your mother is so brazen. Not even that she thinks I'm the help. But that you knew all along. And didn't warn me. Allowed this circus to happen. Gwen, you're exaggerating, Dave tried to defend himself. Mom just wanted to surprise you. She thought you'd be happy. Surprise? Gwen laughed, but there was no joy in it. Moving 7 people into my house, you call that a surprise? Maybe you want to say it was a gift too? Well, Mom wanted to help, Dave continued uncertainly. Pass on her experience, teach you the household chores. She says your soup is too watery. That was the last straw. Gwen grabbed the cup with the half-finished tea and slammed it down in the sink. Here's the deal, she said, turning to her husband. Listen carefully because I won't repeat it. This is my house. I bought it with my own money before we met. I pay the mortgage. I make the rules. Your family can come visit on weekends only if they check with me first. Overnight stays only with my permission. And no moving in. That's not negotiable. Dave stood up. Something like indignation flashed in his eyes. You can't just dictate terms. I live here too. Live here? Gwen nodded. For now, yes. By my invitation. And if you don't like my rules, you're free. Suitcase in hand, and off to your mom's 1-bedroom. Especially now that there's plenty of space there since Betty's moving in with you because they can't afford a rental apartment. She saw his face change, from indignation to confusion, and finally to understanding. Dave knew perfectly well what it meant to return to a cramped parent's apartment after a spacious cottage, especially if his sister was already there with 3 kids. You can't treat me like this, he muttered. We're family. Exactly, Gwen raised her voice. We. You and me. Not your mother, not your sister, not the whole gang. We got married yesterday, and today you're already betraying me by siding with your mother, who tried to take over my house. She walked to the window, looking out at the darkening garden. You know, I always suspected you had strange relations with your mom. But I didn't think it was this bad. That you'd be ready to sacrifice our relationship for her whims. Dave came up behind her and uncertainly placed his hands on her shoulders. Gwen, come on. Nobody's sacrificing anything. Maybe we could help? At least Betty and the kids in the guest house. Nobody lives there anyway. Gwen abruptly turned around, brushing off his hands. No. No, no, and 1,000 times no. No Bettys. No relatives. Nobody will live in my house without my permission. And I do not want that. But why? Dave persisted. What's the harm? We have so much space. Gwen looked at him with pity. You really don't get it? I grew up in a family where someone was always living with us. Grandma, then an aunt, then cousins. I never had a place of my own. Never. All my life I dreamed of having a home where only the people I want to see live. And I will not allow it to become a halfway house. She paused for a second and added softly. Besides, your mother can't stand me. She humiliates me at every chance, criticizes everything, from my hairstyle to my soup. And you want me to live under the same roof with her? Dave was silent, digesting what he heard. Then he sighed. Mom is just old-fashioned. She doesn't mean harm. I don't care if she means harm or not, Gwen cut him off. The result is the same. She's trying to control my life in my house. And I won't allow it. They stood facing each other like strangers. Gwen suddenly thought maybe they really didn't know each other after all. She had thought Dave was an independent man capable of separating himself from his mother. But apparently, he thought she would accept him along with all his family baggage, obligations, and strange ideas about family duty. You know, Dave suddenly said. Mom and I have already talked about this. Gwen tensed. When your grandmother's apartment was sold, Mom said it wasn't right for you to live alone in such a big house when our family has housing problems. Oh, I see. Gwen felt a chill run down her spine. And when exactly did you discuss this? Well, about 3 months ago. Dave hesitated. She asked how many rooms we had, how they were arranged. 3 months ago, Gwen repeated slowly. So before the wedding, you and your mother were already planning what to do with my house without telling me. Dave paled, realizing he had said too much. No, not like that. We were just talking. Theoretically. Theoretically, Gwen smirked. And today's caravan of furniture and movers, is that theory too? Or is it practice? She turned away, feeling tears rise in her throat. Not from hurt, from rage. Leave, she said quietly, not looking back. What? Leave, she repeated louder. I need to be alone. To think. I can't talk to you right now. But, where will I go? Dave was confused. To Mommy's, Gwen finally turned to him. You two planned so well together, so go live there. Dave stood frozen, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. You're kicking me out? I'm asking you to leave for a couple of days, Gwen clarified. I need to figure things out. To understand, if I even want to continue this relationship. Dave's face fell. But we just got married yesterday. Are you ready to throw everything away over one fight? This isn't just a fight, Gwen shook her head. This is a matter of trust. You discussed with your mother behind my back how to handle my house, let her bring furniture and relatives here without telling me. And now you're defending her instead of me. What kind of trust is that? Dave sank into the chair, covering his face with his hands. God, what a nightmare. Why me? Gwen looked at him and felt something inside her crack and break. Instead of support and understanding, self-pity, instead of apologies, accusations. How could she have been so wrong about this man? Because you can't cut the cord, she said tiredly. Because you're not a man, you're a boy still controlled by Mommy. Dave raised his head. Hurt flashed in his eyes. That's not true. I'm an independent person. It's just that in our family, we're expected to help each other. No, Gwen shook her head. In your family, it's customary to use each other. Your mother uses you to get to my house. You use me to live in comfort and to show off the cottage to your friends. She walked to the door and flung it open. Leave. Really? I need to be alone. Dave got up slowly, as if he couldn't believe this was happening to him. I'll call you, he said, passing by her. Tomorrow, when you've calmed down. No need, Gwen shook her head. I'll call when I'm ready. She closed the door behind him and leaned against the wall, feeling her strength drain away. The day had been too intense and exhausting. First her mother-in-law with the caravan, and now this. It was as if some cruel fate had decided to test her resilience right on the day after the wedding. Her phone vibrated. Gwen glanced at the screen. Louisa. She declined the call and muted the sound. Then she thought better of it and turned the phone off entirely. Enough family drama for today. Gwen went into the living room, poured herself a glass of wine, and stepped out onto the terrace. The garden was bathed in twilight, dogs barking somewhere in the distance. A typical suburban evening. Only her life had been turned upside down in just one day. She took a sip and thought that the wedding photos hadn't even developed yet, but the marriage was already cracking at the seams. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was better to admit the mistake now than to suffer for years later. On the other hand, don't people deserve a second chance? Maybe Dave realizes his mistake, understands that breaking away from his mother is a necessary condition of adult life. Gwen finished her wine, watching the stars appear in the dark sky. Time will tell. For now, she just wanted silence and peace in her own home, without mothers-in-law, curses, and grandmothers, and maybe without a husband, for now. In the morning, the phone was ringing off the hook, Louisa, Dave, even Betty for some reason. Gwen ignored them all, busy with her usual routine, breakfast, yoga, working from home. After lunch, there was a knock at the door. Dave stood on the threshold, unshaven, eyes red, wearing a crumpled shirt. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. "To talk?" Gwen silently stepped back, letting him into the house. They went to the kitchen, the very place where their argument had happened the day before. "I've been thinking all night," Dave began, not looking at her. "You're right. I should have told my mom right away that she can't just show up and move in. I should have put her in her place. Sorry." Gwen looked at him, trying to tell if it was a sincere admission or just an attempt to smooth things over and get back to the comfortable cottage. "Yesterday you said something else," she noted, "that I have to accept your family, that there's enough room in this house for everyone." Dave ran his hand through his hair. "I was wrong. This is your house. You have every right to decide who lives here." "And your mother?" Gwen asked. "She understands that now, too. Mom thinks you're being too harsh, that families should stick together, but I explained to her that we will decide how we want to live." Gwen smirked. "So she still thinks I should let her into my house?" "She's just worried about Betty," Dave answered hesitantly. "She has 3 kids, and the rental apartment is expensive." "And that's my problem?" Gwen interrupted. "Why should I solve your sister's housing issue?" Dave was silent, unable to find an answer. "Here's what I'll tell you." Gwen sat on the edge of the table, looking down at her husband. "I agree for you to come back, but on one condition. No talks about moving relatives in, no visits from your mother without my permission. And you're calling her right now to explain my rules. With me listening." Dave went pale. "Right now? With you here?" "Yes," Gwen nodded. "I want to make sure you're really on my side, not trying to sit on 2 chairs." Dave hesitantly took out his phone, looked at Gwen as if hoping she would change her mind. But she only nodded at the device emphatically. Sighing, he dialed the number. Louisa answered almost immediately. "Mom, hi." Dave's voice trembled. "I wanted to talk about yesterday and, well, about our relationship with Gwen." An anxious voice came from the receiver, but the words were unclear. "Mom, listen." Dave took a deep breath. "I want you to understand. The house belongs to Gwen. She has every right to decide who will live there. And she doesn't want other people living there, even relatives. That's her right." His mother-in-law said something indignantly, and Dave cast a helpless glance at Gwen. "Mom, it's not about family," he continued once the torrent of words subsided. "It's about respecting personal boundaries. You can't just come and move in without permission." Another tirade followed from the receiver. Gwen saw Dave shrinking more and more under the pressure of his mother's words. "No, Mom, no. Listen." He tried to get a word in, but unsuccessfully. "Mom." He finally raised his voice. "I can't argue right now. I'm just telling you our decision. No one will live in Gwen's house without her consent. And from now on, please call before visiting. In advance. He hung up and exhaled as if after a heavy workout. She's furious, he noted. She'll get over it, Gwen shrugged. The main thing is that you finally said what you should have said a long time ago. Dave put the phone on the table and rubbed his face with his hands. God, this is so hard. She won't talk to me for 2 weeks now, and then she'll start playing the pity card. But I'll be talking to you. Gwen approached him and placed her hand on his shoulder. And I'll respect you more for finally acting like a man, not a boy. He looked up at her. So, you forgive me, but you're just giving me a second chance for now? Gwen clarified. Forgiveness has to be earned. Dave stood up and hugged her, burying his face in her neck. Thank you. I'll try. Gwen hugged him back, but inside she still felt wary. It's easy to say the right things now, under pressure. But will Dave withstand the test of time? Will he break under his mother's pressure? Will he start talking about helping relatives again in a month or 2? 6 months had passed since the memorable invasion of the mother-in-law. Life was gradually settling into a routine, although echoes of the family conflict were still felt. Gwen sat on the terrace with her laptop, reviewing sketches for a new advertising campaign, when the phone rang, Dave's number. Hi, she answered, holding the phone between her shoulder and ear while continuing to type. Will you be late? Yes. Her husband's voice sounded tense. I need to talk to you. It's important. Gwen stopped typing. Something in his tone made her wary. What happened? I'll tell you at home. I'll be there in an hour. He hung up, leaving Gwen puzzled. Over the past months, their relationship had improved, though it hadn't returned to its previous carefreeness. The mother-in-law kept a conspicuous distance, neither calling nor visiting. Dave visited his parents about once every 2 weeks, usually coming back sullen and speaking little, but there had been no obvious conflicts until today. Gwen closed the laptop, feeling anxiety growing inside her. What could have happened? Exactly 1 hour later, the front door slammed. Dave entered the kitchen where Gwen was preparing dinner and sat down at the table. His face was pale and gaunt. Betty is in trouble, he said bluntly. She's being evicted from her apartment. The landlord decided to sell and gave her a month to move out. Gwen froze, the spoon halfway to the pot. She immediately understood where the conversation was heading. I'm sorry to hear that, she said neutrally. I hope she finds another place. Dave gave her a heavy look. She won't. She's already looked. Prices have gone up, and Christopher is having problems with work again. Few orders, low pay. So what do you suggest? Gwen put down the spoon and crossed her arms. Dave hesitated, then blurted out. Maybe we could help, at least temporarily, by letting her and the kids stay in the guest house. Gwen sighed. She expected this conversation but didn't think it would happen so soon. No, her answer was firm. But Gwen was interrupted. Dave leaned forward. These are kids. 3 of them. They have nowhere to live. They have their grandmother and grandfather, Gwen reminded him. Let them go to your parents. They're already going, Dave answered grimly. Betty with the kids and Christopher. To the one-room apartment where my parents and grandmother already live. Gwen pictured 8 people crammed into a typical one-room Khrushchevka apartment and shuddered inwardly. It'll be cramped, she admitted. But that's not our problem. How is it not our problem? Dave raised his voice. That's my sister, my nephews, whom you see once every 6 months, Gwen retorted, and don't talk to, and now suddenly you're feeling all familial. Dave lowered his eyes. I've always loved Betty and her kids. It's just we haven't been very close lately. Because of me? Yes. Gwen smirked. Let's be honest. Your mother has turned your whole family against me, calls me a spiteful, selfish woman who ruined your family idol. I understand it all, but that's no reason to let people who despise me into our home. Dave looked ashamed. They don't despise you, they just don't understand. Doesn't matter, Gwen cut him off. The answer is no. We will not help them with housing, neither with money nor the guest house. Period. She returned to the stove, making it clear the conversation was over, but Dave didn't give up. Gwen, I'm not asking for forever, a month, maximum 2, until they find another option. A month will stretch into a year, then 10 years, Gwen shook her head. I'm not that naive. But we can draw up a contract, Dave persisted. In writing, with specific deadlines. Gwen turned to him, leaning on the countertop. Be honest, your mother put you up to this, told you to talk to your nasty wife so she might soften up? Dave looked away, and that was answer enough. That's what I thought, Gwen sighed. Listen, I understand your feelings, really. But I didn't fight your mother for my house just to voluntarily let half your relatives in here after 6 months. She walked to the table and sat opposite her husband. Remember how it all started. Your mother tried to take my house without asking, and now she's trying to do the same, but using your hands. She's using you. That's not true, Dave objected, but without much conviction. She's just hurt to see how Betty is suffering, how the kids are cramped. And she didn't suggest giving your sister your one-room apartment and moving in with us? Gwen squinted. Dave was embarrassed again. Well, she says she needs someone to look after Mom. Grandma is old, she needs care. Of course, Gwen gave a wry smile. And a cottage is more comfortable than an apartment. I get it, Dave. Your mother just wants to get what doesn't belong to her, using other people's hands. First she tried directly, now through you. She stood up, returning to the stove. In any case, the answer is no. If you don't like it, you know where the door is. Dave also stood up. Anger flashed in his eyes. And I thought you'd softened over these 6 months, that we'd learned to respect each other's feelings. I respect your feelings, Gwen retorted, but I won't let them be used for manipulation. Your mother is pressuring you, you're pressuring me. It's unfair. It's not about Mom, Dave said stubbornly. It's about my sister and her kids. Don't you feel sorry for them? Gwen sighed. Of course I do, but solving their problems is not my responsibility. Christopher's been struggling with work for years. He's already wasted Grandma's apartment. What next? Are we going to support them for life? No one is talking about forever. Dave raised his voice. We're talking about temporary help, about humanity, about how your family thinks it's normal to solve their problems at someone else's expense, Gwen countered. Grandma's apartment was sold, the money squandered. Now they want to use my house. What's next? They looked at each other across the kitchen, and Gwen suddenly realized the gap between them was much deeper than she thought. It's not about Betty and her kids. It's about fundamentally different views on boundaries, responsibility, and family values. You know, she said quietly, I thought we were on the same side, that after everything, you understood my position, but I see I was wrong. Dave ran a hand through his hair. I understand your position. Really, I'm just torn between you and them, between duty to family and to you. Am I not your family? Gwen asked softly. Dave didn't answer, and that silence said more than words. Go to them, Gwen suddenly said. Seriously? Pack your things and go to Mom's. They need a man's help right now, with moving, settling in. Stay as long as you need. Dave looked at her incredulously. Are you kicking me out? No, Gwen shook her head. I'm giving you a chance to figure out what you really want. Go, live with them, feel what it's like, 8 people in a one-room apartment, then decide where your home is and who your real family is. She turned her back to him, not wanting to show the tears welling up in her eyes. I love you, Dave, but I won't let you or your mother dictate how I live in my own house. A heavy silence fell in the room, broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, Dave exhaled. I'll think about it. Maybe I'll really go stay with them for a couple of days. Help with the move. Fine, Gwen nodded without turning around. Just let me know when you're coming back. He went to the bedroom to pack, and Gwen stayed in the kitchen, looking out at the dark garden. She felt a strange emptiness and at the same time relief. Maybe she was too harsh with her husband, or maybe not harsh enough. Dave was gone for 2 weeks. He called every day, telling her how he was helping his sister settle in, playing with his nephews, trying to find Christopher a job. He didn't mention coming home. At the end of the 2nd week, Gwen called him herself. Maybe you'll come by? Let's talk. Dave came that evening. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, gaunt, and with stubble. How are the family? Gwen asked, pouring tea. A nightmare, Dave admitted honestly. 8 people in a one-room apartment. It's hell. The kids are constantly yelling. Grandma complains, Christopher argues with Dad. Mom tries to please everyone and snaps at everyone in turn. I sleep on the floor in the hallway. He took a sip of tea and looked at Gwen sadly. You were right. It's unbearable. But I don't know what to do. I can't just abandon them all. Gwen was watching her husband closely. So, what are they planning? They're going to live together. Dave shook his head. Betty and Christopher are looking for an apartment, but everything is too expensive. Christopher is trying to find a decent job, but it's hard without education. What about your parents? Gwen took a cookie from the dish. Couldn't they help financially? No, Dave sighed. They only have their pension and my money transfers. Olenka needs at least $40,000 a month to rent a 2-room apartment. Gwen pondered, turning a cup in her hands. You know, I was thinking, I have some savings. I could lend Betty money for the first rent payment on the condition that she pays me back when she can. Dave froze, not believing his ears. Seriously? You're willing to help with money? Yes, Gwen clarified, but no housing, and only as a loan, not a gift. Dave looked at her gratefully. Thank you, really, thank you. That will help them a lot. Not them, Gwen corrected, the kids. I'm doing this for them. She put down the cup. And one more condition, you come back home. Enough sleeping on the hallway floor. Dave smiled for the first time that evening. Gladly. I've damn well missed a proper bed and you, of course. And one more thing, Gwen continued, I want you to talk to your mother, explain that our financial help is the most we're willing to do. No staying for a week, no hints about moving in. Understood, Dave nodded. I promise. I've learned a lot these 2 weeks. You were really right. Family is great, but when everyone meddles in each other's lives, it only gets worse. Glad you finally realized that. Gwen reached across the table, and he squeezed her hand. You know what's funny? Dave said after a pause. Mom realized it too. When Betty moved in with the kids, she was thrilled at first. Grandkids nearby, daughter at her side, but after a week she was already complaining there's no peace, no personal space. Gwen couldn't hold back a chuckle. Is that so? And she accused me of being selfish for not wanting to let a crowd into the house. You know what she told me yesterday? Dave smiled too. Son, now I understand your Gwen. Sometimes boundaries are a salvation, not selfishness. Gwen laughed. I can't believe my ears. Did Louise really admit she was wrong? Well, not exactly like that, Dave grinned. More like she learned the value of personal space the hard way. They were silent, finishing their tea. Then Gwen asked, How's the old lady, your grandmother? How's she handling so many people? Grandma, Dave shook his head. Can you believe she's delighted? She says finally the house has life, not silence like a cemetery. She spends whole days with the great-grandkids, reads them stories, teaches them to knit. It's like she's got a second youth. See, Gwen smiled. Even in such a situation, there's something good. Yeah, Dave stretched. But my limit of family closeness is used up for a year ahead. I want peace, quiet, and you. Gwen stood up, walked over to him, and hugged him by the shoulders. You'll have peace and quiet. Come on, I'll show you how much I missed you. A month later, Betty and her family moved to a small 2-room apartment on the outskirts. Christopher got a job in construction. The pay was decent. They promised to repay Gwen's loan by the end of the year. Louise stopped calling with complaints. Now that only 3 people remained in her apartment, herself, her husband, and her grandmother, life had settled down. Although she no longer visited the young family, her pride wouldn't allow it. One day, Dave came back from his parents' house deep in thought. You know what Mom said? He shared at dinner. That she now understands why you value your space so much. She said that after Betty and the kids moved out, the apartment feels like a palace to her, even though it's still the same 1-room flat. Gwen smiled. Better late than never. She even wanted to apologize, Dave continued. But she doesn't know how. She's ashamed. Tell her to come for dinner on Saturday, Gwen unexpectedly suggested. But without Dad and Grandma. We'll talk. Dave looked at his wife with doubt. Are you sure? You two can't stand each other. I can survive one evening, Gwen shrugged. If your mother really realized her mistakes, maybe it's worth giving her a chance. So Saturday came. Louise arrived with a cake and a bouquet, looking embarrassed, nothing like the fierce woman who tried to break down the gate 6 months ago. The dinner went surprisingly peacefully. The mother-in-law even complimented the soup, though she couldn't resist saying it could have used more pepper. Gwen just smiled. Some things never change. After dinner, Dave went to the garage, leaving the women alone. An awkward silence hung in the air. Thank you for inviting me, Louise finally said. I understand I behaved wrongly. I shouldn't have pushed so hard. Gwen nodded, taking the words as an apology. It's all in the past. The important thing is that now we understand each other better, Louise said, turning a cup in her hands. When Betty and the kids lived with us, I realized how hard it is. Constant noise, no personal space. And you have such a lovely home, peace and order. Gwen looked at her mother-in-law carefully, trying to grasp what she was getting at. You're a wonderful hostess, the woman continued. And a good wife to Dave. He's happy with you. Thank you, Gwen replied reservedly, still expecting a catch. And I want you to know, The mother-in-law finally raised her eyes. I will never interfere in your life again. I won't impose myself. I will come only by invitation. She paused and added quietly, and thank you for helping Betty financially. That's very noble of you. Gwen felt the inner tension she had carried for the past 6 months begin to ease. Maybe this woman really had changed, or at least learned to respect other people's boundaries. Come again next weekend, Gwen offered. We'll have a family lunch with your husband and Grandma. Louise's eyes gleamed suspiciously. Really, you don't mind? No, Gwen confirmed, but just as guests, for lunch, no suitcases or furniture. They both laughed, and for the first time in all their acquaintance, the laughter was genuine, without tension or pretense. When the mother-in-law left, Gwen stepped onto the terrace, looking over her well-kept garden. Dave came up behind her and hugged her shoulders. How did it go? Better than I expected, Gwen admitted. It seems she really understood a lot. I told you, Dave smiled and kissed her temple. Mom's not evil, just old-fashioned. She needed time and a good lesson, Gwen added. Nothing teaches you to appreciate personal space like its absence. They stood holding each other, enjoying the silence and peace of their home. A home Gwen had fought for and defended. Maybe Dave was right, and his mother really had changed, or maybe she was just lying low for now. But one thing Gwen knew for sure, she would no longer let anyone violate the boundaries of her home and her life. And she also knew that the ability to protect those boundaries, to stand up for your space and your principles, is not selfishness but a necessary condition for happiness. And sometimes, for that, you really do have to swear through the gate. The main thing is to do it on time and with purpose.